My name is David Mackay. I'm the Head of Policy at Soil Association. I'm going to share my screen now and just take you through a couple of slides just to set the context for what we're about to hear this afternoon. So today's session is being jointly hosted by Soil Association Scotland and Food Farming and Countryside Commission. We have Lucy Wardle here from FFCC. You can see her, I think, on the right of your screen, and she'll be keeping an eye on the chat, as I say, as we go through today's event. And it's going to be on integrating livestock and arable systems. And we're delighted to have guest speaker Johnnie Balfour from Balbirnie Home Farms in Fife. Before we get to Johnnie, however, I just want to briefly touch upon some of the kind of policy context in which we're operating here in Scotland at the moment. Excuse me, I seem to have lost the ability to move slides. There we go. So we're in a period of transition at the moment for farming and land use in Scotland. Our farmers and our crofters are being asked to take action to reduce emissions, to help restore biodiversity, all the while continuing to produce high quality food. This is all set against the backdrop of some quite ambitious climate change targets that have been set by the Scottish Government, which I'm sure you will all be familiar with. We have to meet net zero by 2045, and there's an interim target of 75% reduction in emissions by 2030 relative to 1990 levels. Now, agriculture has to play its part in that process, along with other sectors of the economy. And at the moment, the Scottish Government is working through what will be the post-cap agricultural policy. We still don't yet know the full detail of what that policy is going to look like, but what we have heard from the Cabinet Secretary, Mary Goujon, is that Scotland wants to be a global leader in sustainable and regenerative agriculture. We also know that the Scottish Government wants to continue with direct payments to farmers, and what we heard from the Cabinet Secretary is that by 2025, half of those direct payments will be conditional, and that conditionality will be based upon agreed metrics around things like emissions reduction and biodiversity gain. Again, we're yet to see the detail on that. In order to drive through these changes, the government set up the Agriculture Reform Implementation and Oversight Board, which more helpfully has been referred to as AREOB for short. Now, that board is going to work alongside government and drive forward the work from the previous farmer-led climate change groups and help to steer that future policy development. And the first stage of that we've been told about is the National Testing Programme. That was announced in November last year, and it's going to be split into two stages, the first of which is around voluntary carbon audits, nutrient management plans, and soil testing, for a second phase, which will be about researching and testing new approaches to gathering data as we approach 2024-25, when the new system is due to kick in. And finally, we have a consultation plan this summer or into the autumn, where the government has said it will set out the full rationale and proposals for a future agriculture bill, which will be coming in 2023, and it is designed to be the replacement for the CAP. So whilst all that has been going on, a group of organisations within the Scottish Environment Link Food and Farming Group have come together for this project that has led to this event today. It's being led by Nourish Scotland, and it also involves the Nature Friendly Farming Network, FFCC, Soil Association, Land Workers Alliance, and the FLA. And the group was successful in securing funding from the government's Knowledge Transfer and Innovation Fund. The project is focused on agroecology and is designed to be based around knowledge sharing between farmers and farmers, and hopefully starting through these online events and also a series of on-farm events, building up some networks that farmers can share information about agroecological practices. So we have 15 events in total running through February and March. As I said, it's a mix of online, in person, and it's all based on agroecology, which some of you will be very familiar with the term, but for anyone who isn't, in very practical terms, what we're talking about here is the application of ecological principles to agricultural systems, basically in a way that will create more beneficial relationships between plants, animals, and humans. Now, what that means in terms of practical farming practices, it could be things like nutrient cycling, ecological pest control, integrating trees with livestock, and as we're about to hear shortly from Johnnie, integrating livestock into arable rotations. Our hope with these sessions is that we can prompt a good discussion. So again, I would urge you to use the chat function, ask any questions, pop questions in the chat as we go, as Johnnie is speaking. And when we get to the end and we get into the discussion, please feel free to use the raise hand function and just ask questions. And as I say, hopefully we can have a good discussion. Now, I'm going to stop sharing now, and I will pass over to Johnnie Balfour.
Thank you, David. Lucy, you seem to still have David as the primary primary video. I am Johnnie Balfour from Balbirnie Home Farms in Fife, and we farm cereals, vegetables. We have a herd of pasture for life, certified beef cattle, and we also have some forestry, some of which fell down in Storm Arwen, and some let properties too. Up until a few years ago, I would say that we were farming in what would be described as a very mainstream way. Up until 2005, we had a dairy, and we also had our beef herd, as well as our vegetables and cereals. Just before I go on, a little bit of a disclaimer here that our context is what it is and will be different from what anybody else's context is. So the exact things that we've done and when we've done them won't be the same, won't work the same way for everybody else. But the fundamental mindset change and thinking behind what we're doing will apply in almost any circumstance. And also, the other disclaimer is that we're very much in transition, and I wouldn't say that we have got it. We are making progress towards an agroecological future. The system that we used to have was high input, apparently high output, but we were running faster and faster and not really getting anywhere. In 2005, I think it was, we closed our dairy while losing 5 pence on every litre of milk that we were producing at that point. It just wasn't sustainable. The beef finishing system that we had back then, and still had until only a handful of years ago, was based on homegrown barley with silage, and we would finish our young stock between 13 and 17 months. On the face of it, it would look like we had an integrated business in the sense that we were a mixed farm with livestock and arable. And in terms of machinery, in terms of labor, we were integrated, But in terms of biology, we were definitely not. And livestock would spend their time on permanent pasture or in a shed, and arable fields would be used to grow either arable crops or barley to feed as forage. When I was younger, I remember doing some zero grazing in our dairy with robots milking the cows, and looking back on the system that we used to have, I can now see a number of problems. We had no animal impact on much of the ground. All the food that the animals were going to eat, we had to take to them. All the bedding that they were going to sleep on, we had to take to them. All of the muck that they produced, we had to take away from them and store it. And all of that fertility had to be spread across all of the fields. And we didn't have nearly enough, certainly recently, after the dairy closed, we didn't have nearly enough animals to be able to spread that fertility around the rest of the farm. Everything that we did needed a machine and a person. And we didn't have any rotational benefit from having the cows, because we were growing spring barley and wheat and oats to sell to as arable crops. And then we were also growing winter barley to feed the cattle. So we were struggling with diversity as well. What was the answer? We didn't describe it as such at the time, but a change towards agroecological thinking was our answer. For us, that meant treating the farm as an ecosystem, and working with nature rather than against it. So examples of the type of agroecological things that we've done, and I haven't moved through any of these photographs, but I should have done. Cattle in a shed, they were being fed brock veg. They also got silage. We grew the barley to feed to them, and I'll get onto this in a second. Examples of the types of agroecological changes that we made were putting the animals outdoors into the winter. And actually, I was looking through that we have had animals outdoors on stubble fields in the winter as far back as 2012. We have reduced tillage. As you can see, this is our old system. You can see the plough in the background, see a absolutely whopping tractor moving a ridiculous amount of soil, and all to sow a cereal. We have reduced synthetic inputs, but none of that is what we're talking about today. The other thing we've done is we've tried to integrate our livestock into our arable rotation. What does that mean for us? It means growing crops on the arable side as a break crop to feed livestock, and feed them in situ, rather than having to harvest the crop and take it away. We have managed to do this in both winter and summer. We have also grown animals on stubble. This is animals in winter, happen to be somebody else's sheep being looked after in the winter on our grass. We've also grown short and medium-term lays in order to get livestock on a field more than once in a block, because when we grow a forage crop over the winter, the animals go onto it, they eat it, but once it's eaten, we need to do something else with the field. One of our better grass fields has been a medium-term lay into a former arable field, which had been a dairy field before that. The mixture of grasses and herbs and clovers in there is much better than it is anywhere else. We fundamentally letting the livestock eat, sleep, and fertilize where we want the nutrients, rather than burning diesel in order to let the cows do what they're capable of doing themselves, has been at the heart of what we've tried to do. The things to get right that we've found by integrating cattle into arable rotations, basically it is fencing and water. Most of the arable side of the business hadn't seen livestock since at least the early 90s, and many of it since long before then. Almost none of the fences were in working order. So at the moment, rather than spending money on expensive feed and mixing and taking feed to cattle, we're spending a lot of money on fences, as the photo shows. I would hate to think how much we've spent over the past 5 or 6 years. What next? At the moment, we're still calving indoors. We would like to make the jump to letting the cows do it themselves outside. One of the things that's holding us back is our own fears about what might go wrong. And getting over that stumbling block is going to be the most difficult part. And in everything that we've done in our business, the most difficult part to get over is our own mental hurdles. We would love to be able to have cattle outdoors 365 days of the year, which our young stock are, but our calving, our suckler cows do come in for calving, and then when they had their calf, they go back out again. This is the winter winter ration from last year. We put some silage in this forage crop. Oh, hang on a second, that wasn't meant to happen. And that then grew up, and we were able to strip graze them through the winter, giving them plenty to eat, and some good silage. The other thing that we would like to do is to increase the diversity of our livestock. At the moment, I mentioned sheep once, but basically I've only mentioned cattle, and the sheep that eat some of our crops are not ours. We don't have any control over them, really. But if we want to make the system really good, we're going to need to stack our enterprises on top of the arable and the cattle we've already got. So I can imagine a time when there might be some sheep, there might be some pigs, there might be some chickens. Who knows? The sky's the limit. More diversity is better. The other thing that we want to do next is continue fencing the arable side of the farm to give maximum flexibility with our management. At the moment, not every field has a fence around it, so we can't be flexible and decide that this year something's not working and we're just going to grow a forage crop and put the cattle on it. We have to plan it at least a year in advance, so we've got time to make sure that the water and the fences are all right. And this picture illustrates it quite well. When cattle are on the arable part of the business, part of the farm, there's not a lot of shelter. We would like to not only integrate livestock into the arable side, but also integrate some trees into the arable side of the business. And we're going to be starting that actually next year, planting some an orchard. So there's an awful lot still to do. We're nowhere near we've nowhere near got it, but we're trying hard and using the agroecological principles, using regenerative agriculture, the 5 principles of increasing diversity, reducing disturbance, and I've forgotten what the other 3 are, but they're going to come to me in a second. As we go through, the farm will get. We will look after our soil, we will look after our wildlife, and we'll be able to look after ourselves much better. An interesting comparison between where we have gone and where we're trying to get to is that the photograph I put on first was taken from almost this exact same spot, but 16 years earlier. Previously, the cattle were grazing grass that was about this long. Now, as you can see, they're grazing they're mob grazing through a much better mixed sward. All sorts of mixtures that particular crop was the cattle's bed last winter. We fed them on some forage and they got some run back that they could lie on. That was that. And oh yes, the fencing. If there's one takeaway from this, getting livestock onto arable, it's how you're going to keep your livestock in and how you're going to water them. So I think that's all I've got to say. I'll stop sharing my screen now. And Lucy, David?
That was great. Thank you so much. It's really interesting to hear about the changes that have happened over time and seeing those photographs as well. So thank you. That was great. So we're going to take some questions now. And we're really hoping to have an open discussion here. So feel free to unmute and turn your camera on and have a chat here. But I was just going to go to a couple that I've already seen in the chat. So we've got, I don't know if this is a question really, but we've got Aaron, who is west of Aberdeen, saying that they're looking to see how this would work teaming up with arable farmers. So they're a livestock farmer looking to see how it would work teaming up with arable farmers to ease pressure at certain times of the year, currently using rotational grazing. So that's quite an interesting question, and maybe thinking about the opportunities here for maybe farmers to team up. I know you said that you had some other people's sheep on your land. So how does that work? And do you see opportunities there for livestock farmers and arable farmers to team up for this?
I think it's a very good question. We're very fortunate that we basically had 2 sides of the business that we were kind of running separately that we were able to very easily merge together. Farmers who aren't as fortunate as us and are just running one or other side of those businesses they are going to have to make contacts near them and try and get their livestock onto somebody else's farm. But equally, the arable farmer could easily want the livestock to be there in order that they can benefit from the fertility. I know lots of, certainly down in England, lots of people have straw for muck deals, which is kind of what we were doing before, in that we were taking the straw from the arable fields, sticking it in the shed, getting the cows to do their stuff on it, and then spreading it back on the arable fields. I think it's much more beneficial for everyone if the animals can actually be on the field and doing what they need to right there.
So maybe, I don't know if anyone else here you know, has some advice of how best to team up with other farmers in your area to try and
I would have thought that through the farming forum is probably not a bad idea to try and find somebody, or even Twitter. It's amazing what you can find on Twitter.
Yeah, so maybe we've identified there kind of a gap, I suppose, for some peer-to-peer networks in certain geographical areas to link up. So that's something really interesting that we can all kind of go away and think about how to figure out that one. So we've got another question here from Paul Barnes, who asks, what sort of fresh yields are you getting from your arable grazing crops, Johnny?
We haven't measured many of them, but we did measure one last summer. So we grew a summer cover crop that was about this high, and that's from, like, when I'm standing up. I mean, it was big. We cut down a meter of it, a meter square of it, and measured it, and based on that, it weighed, I think it was 90 tons a hectare. However, we don't think that there was nearly that in terms of dry matter, and we didn't try and measure how much it weighed in terms of dry matter. It certainly fed the cattle. The 6 hectare field fed 85 cattle for 3 weeks or something, which gave us, we were using that as a means to get rest into the grass in August, because the grass grows much slower in the later part of the summer. So having a cover crop allows us to go deeper into the autumn, still on grass.
Great. And we have a kind of follow-up question here from Aaron as well about, are there certain times of the year that suits arable farms for livestock to fit into their rotation?
It depends. It depends on the context of what it is that the arable farmer wants and what it is that the livestock farmer wants, and whether they can all meet in the middle and work it out. We have found with us, most of our sandiest ground that is easiest to outwinter cattle happens to also be our arable stuff. So we're using arable land to outwinter cattle. But we're also using arable land in the middle of summer to extend our grazing season. And yeah, there's no reason why it can't work at all times of year. It just depends on what you've got and what you want to do with it. We do have a plan next year to get in some more animals to graze a short-term lay in a field that is hasn't yielded brilliantly for the last few years. So we're going to go to probably a 3-year lay and graze it through the summer with young stock. But yes, all times of year with all animals. It just depends on how the individuals are working.
Great. And we have a question here, kind of continuing on the lay topic. So Gordon Caldwell, who is an arable and veg farmer in Ayrshire, has put 18 acres of herbal lay into an underperforming field. It is stock proof, kind of. How many cattle or sheep do you think it could carry for the next 3 years?
It depends on how you graze it. If it's set stocked, it'll, I don't know. Yeah, it's really difficult to know without knowing exactly what the field has got in it, because we have just in the space of our farm, we have lots of different fields which yield all sorts of different amounts, and have changed over time. The variability, the number of variables is huge, but in a field of 18 acres, if you've got cattle on it for the full time, I mean, if you had 10 or 12 cattle on it, are they going to get through the winter? Possibly. It depends how they're how the herbal lay is performing.
Great. So I'm going to go to a question here, which is more about the investment. So has the investment in infrastructure, like fencing, to integrate the arable and livestock been worth it? And has that been the most challenging aspect for the business so far, or has there been other challenges?
Great question. The amount of money that we have saved through reducing the number of hours that we've spent in a tractor and selling the feed wagon, and not buying in any of the feed additives to add to the barley. We've spent more than that on putting the fences in, but the savings that we're making on the arable side in terms of not needing as many crop protection products and synthetic inputs means that over a probably 5 or 6 year time period, it will be worth it. It's quite a big hit initially, but thinking about the whole system and how much we're spending on the whole system in order to get a couple of fields fenced means it's definitely worth it. So what's been the most challenging aspect? The most challenging aspect's up here. The most challenging aspect is changing the way that people are looking at a landscape and looking at the farm, when in some cases they might have been looking at it in the same way for an entire lifetime. That's the most challenging aspect. We are, as farmers, we are incredibly conservative, and we don't really like to change what we're doing too much. So that's the tricky bit. Have there been, so what other challenges? Well, yeah, water supply is always a challenge. For those people who are lucky enough to be on mains for all of their farm, they won't have a problem. But if you're mobbing up your cattle, which I haven't really talked about because this is about arable systems, but when you're managing livestock by having them in a big mob for a short time and then moving them quickly is the way to maximize the growth of whatever perennial crop that you've got growing, the grass or the mixed sward. Yeah, so the challenges around making sure that you've got enough water to supply those big mobs of cattle, that's a bit of a challenge in a dry summer. Albeit if that person, oh no, that's not the airship person, is it? I was going to say an airship person probably doesn't get dragged.
Yeah, that's a different. Yeah, so we did have that question on are you self-sufficient in water or rely on mains? So I think you've covered that one off. That water is tricky.
We've got most of our arable fields are near enough to a main, and at some point, all of them have had water in them. A couple of fields that haven't had a good water supply in them for a long time, we bought a small solar-powered pump that we put onto the water supply, and it keeps the pressure high enough, and we can have a couple of hundred mouths drinking out of a trough, and it keeps it going.
Great.
A solar-powered pump is very useful if you're not on the mains.
Mm-hmm. That's a great tip. So we had another question as well from Paul. Have you tried broadcasting forage crops into a standing cereal crop?
Yes, we have. With mixed success. We also tried broadcasting oilseed rape into standing spring barley 2 years ago. We got a crop out of it, and it cost us absolutely diddly squat to do. Although combine driver was swearing about the number of thistles in the field, so it was the jury's out, I would say, on that one. Broadcasting forage crops into a standing cereal, we broadcast what we thought might be a forage crop, but then we couldn't get the field fenced quickly enough, so it ended up just being a cover crop. We managed to borrow a stripper header for a couple of days, or a day, and we broadcast into this really long stripped barley field. That looked great when it came up.
There's another question that kind of follows on from that a little bit about thinking about the certain crops that work best. So when considering whether or not to introduce livestock, are there certain crops and certain animals that work best together? Do you have any kind of recommendations on that?
From what perspective? As in what to feed them? Or so in terms of what to feed the cattle or the sheep, we're not really thinking of it in terms of certainly in the summer, it's just about diversity and getting as much in as possible. In the winter, we've found that brassicas are the best thing to keep quality late into the winter. Once you get to this time of year, eating some kind of brassica, forage rape or turnips or whatever it is, combined with silage and possibly some kind of run back with a decent amount of grass in it, works pretty well. We don't have any sheep, and the sheep that we get in, they generally eat either new lays, or we put them onto old veg crops that haven't been sold. So I wouldn't like to comment on what would be best for sheep, because we're sending cattle into crops that are this high. I'm not quite sure how the sheep would do at that point. You'd have to talk to an expert. More diversity is better, is basically it.
Okay, always max out on the diversity wherever possible. That's a good message. So another kind of slightly different question here. When thinking about marketing and selling end products from this type of farming, does it add value to either the crop or the livestock product? So I guess here we're thinking that there are some gains in the way that you're farming for the environment, for biodiversity, and so the end product could be considered as a more sustainable product. Do you think about that kind of end supply chain, and is there any way that you know of at the moment where these benefits are being transferred through the system to the end product?
Yes, Pasture for Life certification. We wouldn't be allowed. We're only allowed to feed forage crops in situ. We're not allowed to. We're not allowed to feed barley to the cattle, and we are working hard on, as Pasture for Life, trying to get more of a premium for that product. At the moment, we do get a small premium, but we're working on expanding that market and getting more for it. Is it worth anything more to the arable crops? No, probably not. But it is. There are savings to be made, so it's not necessarily about getting more. It's about spending less.
Right. You have kind of covered the challenges, but I had another question about what has been the most challenging aspect in setting this all up, and what advice would you give to people who are just starting out this journey? If you could go back to when you were just starting, thinking about these ideas, what kind of advice would you give people in that situation?
As in what to do first?
Yeah, and how to prepare, I suppose, for those challenges that you might face.
Have a plan, and if you're the arable farmer, fence a field, grow something in it, and find a local livestock farmer who wants to graze it. If you're the livestock farmer who wants to get onto arable, keep nudging your arable farmer friends to grow something for you, so that you can have some winter feed. There could be, you can use the greening requirements to your advantage, that you are allowed to graze crops that you put in for greening after certain times and before certain times, depending on what you've got. You may be able to still collect the greening money, and as a bonus get some grazing out of it at a particular time of year. Now, obviously, because it's set up by the government, it's not as flexible as we might like, but that would be a good place to start.
Great, good advice. So we've got another one here from Paul. Have you done a carbon audit against your system?
Yes, we did one last year, and the numbers basically said that if we can do this better and reduce the synthetic nitrogen down towards zero, that the overall carbon footprint of the whole business will approach zero. It basically will only be the diesel usage. So that's why we're working on reducing the diesel usage as well. But our net footprint was synthetic nitrogen plus diesel, and the albeit that the footprinting tool did say that we had massive enteric fermentation, but it also gave us some credit for the pasture, and they basically netted each other off. The old system, the footprint was bigger. We have a carbon footprint going back to 2000 and I'm going to say 6, 8, something like that. And our carbon footprint is smaller than it was, but still way too high.
So have you considered any other ways to reduce that synthetic nitrogen? I'm just thinking myself, because we're in the following sessions in this kind of series, we're going to be looking at intercropping. So I wondered, have you tried any intercropping yourself? Would you think that would be a way of reducing synthetic N?
We already made a decision this year to put in an extra 40 hectares of ley rather than putting in a spring cereal, because nitrogen prices were sky high, and we thought we'd give it a fertility boost with some cattle rather than spending the money on the nitrogen. We've also considered, we've grown some companion crops with our arable crops. We haven't yet tried a 2010 carbon footprint, there you go. We've not tried a living mulch of clover yet, but that's on the target list.
Great. I have another question here from Ewan Coldwell from the James Hutton Institute. Have you considered virtual fence systems such as no fence that include fitting livestock collars and using that with a phone app, or are they not cost effective yet? So that's a really interesting one, because I think we've all been hearing quite a lot about no fence. So it'd be good to hear your thoughts on that and if it could work with this kind of system.
So I do know people who use no fence, and again, I think it depends on your context and what you're trying to do. I feel that no fence would be fantastic on a block fenced area. Like if our entire farm was ring fenced and we just put a ring fence around it and then did no fence in the middle, we could probably make it stack up in terms of expense. In our situation, we've got a dual carriageway, the main East Coast rail line, and a whole bunch of other roads and footpaths all going around and through the farm. So we can't just fence the entire thing and then do no fence in the middle. So once we've decided that we're fencing individual fields, or 2 or 3 fields together, it's significantly cheaper for us to then use normal electric fencing rather than no fence, because they are incredibly expensive. But there must be situations where it works, because I do know people who use them. So I would say look at the numbers, look at what it's going to cost you to fence your fields in the way that you need them, and if the no fence works, bring it on. If it doesn't, well, electric fencing is not that expensive.
Mm-hmm. So it could be the case that as the years go on and more people start using technology like no fence, maybe the prices will come down and that will make it more viable.
Also, there are things about the no fence that because it's based on GPS, the fence moves slightly, and if you've got a road or a fence or a hedge or something, then there's a physical boundary and that's fine. But if you haven't and you've just got an open thing to a road, I'm personally a little bit worried about that. I certainly wouldn't like to do it alongside the dual carriageway or the East Coast train line.
So I don't think we've got any other questions in the chat, but if you do have anything to ask, then please put it in there, or just unmute and ask Johnny. I had kind of a final question for you. You've touched on this a little bit, but I just wondered if you could give us a bit of an insight into the future and what you think are going to be kind of the main challenges or some opportunities for you, and what you'll be focusing on in this kind of system in the coming years, if you have a vision for the future.
Different animals. I think they're going to be selling more food directly to people to eat in Fife, rather than selling commodities into a global market. I think that has to be the future of farming. Is we have to feed us, the people that live in and around the farm, rather than being price takers. I think we need to be. I'd like to do more that allows us to make the price and take it. So that's going to involve having a greater variety of vegetables, of fruits, of meat, of cover crops, of grains, and potentially doing some processing of that, if not on farm, close to farm.
That is a great message to close out on. Shorter supply chains, more power to the producers themselves, being price makers rather than price takers. So that's a really nice sentiment to finish on. So thank you so much for answering all of our questions. I will pass over to David just for kind of some closing remarks. David?
Yes, thank you, Lucy, and thank you, Johnny. That was a really interesting presentation. Some great questions and answers there. It was a good virtual discussion. I'm going to share my screen just briefly. As we indicated just at the beginning, this is just one event in a series of 15 in total that are taking place over the course of February and March under this CATIV project. So if you look at the bottom of your screen there, you will see the link to the Nourish Scotland page, which has a full list of all the other events that are going to be taking place over the next 6 to 8 weeks. Otherwise, you can contact me at Soil Association, my email's there, and Lucy at Food Farming and Countryside Commission. I've put both those email contacts there, or you can message us through the chat just now as well, if you want to leave email addresses or anything for us to follow up with you. Please do keep an eye out for the next event. We're planning to stay in Fife. We are going to a farm, a Park Hill farm, where the farmer there, Roger Howson, has mixed a silvo arable system. So he has cider apples mixed in with his barley crop. So avenues of trees down the middle of the barley field, which I'm personally very excited to go and have a look at. And I think it'll be great for us to have an in-person event there, and that's going to be towards the end of February. And we'll be advertising that over the next week or so. So please do look out for that, and please do make use of these contact points here for anyone interested in following up with these events and finding out more. But thank you all for coming today, and thank you again to Johnnie for presenting, and to you, Lucy, for managing the Q&A.
Thank you everyone for coming, and thanks so much Johnnie for sharing all of that with us. And as David said, get in touch if you have any questions. Thanks so much everyone. Bye.